This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the warm welcome. So folks, today we're going to be talking a little bit about coaching and coaching tools. It's an ever popular topic. Some of you have attended these sessions before with Bob and myself. A little bit about myself, I ventured into agility around 2001, got into being a Scrum Master, product owner, agile coach, team level, enterprise level, worked with a number of teams, both that were, struggling and trying to figure and make sense of things, to people who claimed they knew agile, to hyper-productive teams. I do have a whole list of letters after my name. I am a curious person. I like to learn. So there are a lot of certifying bodies out there. Again, we have presented on some of these as well. And, where should I start? What are certifications out there? And the chapter has provided that information as well. But besides the alphabet soup, I'd like to get a little bit into my psychological profile, because this is the whole philosophy of know thyself. And I did marry a psychologist. So when I'm getting off the couch, she says, "Hey, you're going to go make a cup of tea now, aren't you?" And I look at her suspiciously and I said, "Yes. How did you know that?" She said, "Oh, honey, could you make one for me as well?" I said, "Yes, but could you go back a step? How did you figure that out?" I know she's not part psychic. And it's really into pattern identification. So I live with a very interesting person right at home. I have used StrengthsFinder, the DISC model, Myers-Briggs. Some of you might relate to these things. And this will also weave itself later in the presentation. But besides the multitude of letters, there are a few coaching institutions out there. So there's CRR Global and CTI, the Coactive Training Institute, that offers a lot in the realm of professional coaching. And these aren't necessarily geared towards agility, which is very interesting to me. However, there are also some out there, I see Agile, that are a little bit more focused in the world of agility. Why does this matter? How does this matter? We'll learn about this as well in a few slides down ahead. So why this topic? Again, there are so many Agile coaches out there. There are a lot of organizations that are undergoing either an adoption or a transformation. It could be a top-down approach, a bottom-up approach, or stealth. And people are still a little fuzzy on, what do coaches bring? Are they management consultants? Do they tell you things? Do they guide you? Are they of any value? So we'll get a little into coaching tools, but besides that, I'll also bring out a few coaching skills. These are usually unseen, unheard, or invisible, as I like to call them. So anyone can grab a hammer, but how one uses that is something that's a bit of a craft, and it takes years to develop, and technique as well. So I do want to make one distinction here. We talk a lot about Agile coaching, but what do professional coaches do? Here we are taking a neutral stance for the client, unbiased, and staying and offering our presence to them. Really just staying curious in the moment and trying to understand what's going on, help reveal what's going on, and this is just the calling out of things explicitly, and truly hope that in the future you're not needed, that you can walk away from something. This is not your agenda. You don't have anything. This is truly in servitude of the person, the pair, the group, or the entity in front of you. So with Agile coaching then, An agile coach can also distinguish between a few competencies, such as mentoring, teaching, and facilitation. We presented a little bit on this before with a model, which will again come to light in the slides ahead. And this is another interesting thing. You're actually an outsider for an agile or scrum team. If you truly have a self-organized, empowered team, you may or may not be needed, or you might just be offering light touches along the way. And think of the analogy or metaphor of Olympic athletes. Hey, they've got coaches as well, but the coach isn't the one running the marathon or engaging in that activity, are they? So designing the alliance. A few years ago, this is just a story, I was asked to be a part of a scrum team through a coaching stance. So we got everybody, fortunately, this was pre-COVID and we could get everybody in the room together. And I just asked the question, how do you want to work with me? And that led to a lot of blank stares. It was something very unusual, and this was something people hadn't been asked before. So I set up an activity. I said, hey, look, I've got a few Post-its over here. Why don't we add one thought or sentence and then slap it on the wall? We're not going to talk about this. We're just going to write, and then I'll help debrief. So people grabbed a writing instrument and they started scribbling away. So what emerged? So I started reading things like, teach us, hold us to a higher standard, be patient. And not only did I read this, the individuals in the room started seeing a few common patterns, and some of them had additional things, and some of them had similar or identical things. So what were the tools used? There's something called silent writing, where we intentionally are not asking people to speak. We want to have everybody have an opportunity to express themselves. And this comes with what we call as a listening level 2 and deep democracy. Deep democracy allows all the voices in the room to be heard. You know, some people are more introverted and shy, and some people dominate the conversation. They're more explicit, extroverted. But in this exercise, we just scribble away. So now that people kind of knew about this alliance, I said, well, how do you want to work with each other? Now, this was a little easier to comprehend. The team had just figured out how they want to work with this stranger, this outsider, someone who's new to the team. And it was easier, again, to use the same Post-it notes, scribble something, and put it up on a wall. Right? This is now heading towards self-organizing. We talk about this a lot, but it's not clearly defined in the Scrum Guide. It's intentionally loosey-goosey, and we don't talk about some of the tools or practices that could help us get there. So I further asked the question, well, can I give this more shape? You know, now that I'm seeing all these cards come up on the board, people are starting to see them as well. And now, as a coach, I'm simply going to be asking a few more questions of this team. And here I am seeking permission, which is a great soft skill to have, and I'm going to be reviewing a few things. So what are the questions that I asked of this team that's very curious now? And I said, okay, how do we want to work with each other? You know, we got an answer, and how may that look like? This is interesting because now I'm looking for a tangible example. And I asked some other questions along the way. Hey, can we use humor? Are jokes okay? You know, and they said yes. And someone said, hey, why did Adele cross the road? That's more of an Alexa joke, but that's acceptable. Can we volunteer or call on each other? How do we want to be corrected? How do we celebrate? Do we want to have a pizza party? Do we want to give kudos, a slap on the back, a high five, email to leadership? And how do we want to mourn? Now, mourning is a heavy word. People usually don't use that in corporate America. But how do we want to face disappointments? Because there are going to be times deadlines will be missed, things will be misunderstood, morale will be low. Is there anything that you need? Interestingly, when I take this to other teams, the answers are different. They're not always the same. And there could also be other questions that emerge along the way. And Scrum Masters use this along retrospectives as well. So there are intentional question marks here to just get us all thinking, hey, is this something universal? Or is this simply a container for other teams to what might emerge? Again, some revelations. I then ask the questions, hey, will we always agree? We know the answer to this. It's going to be no. So now I'm going to get into very specific agile scenario-based questions with the team. So now I'm churning and again, getting into revealing. What does that mean? So I said, well, now that we kind of know how we want to work with me, we kind of know how we want to work with each other, we've got a few examples, we know some things are going to happen with this team. Now, this was a Scrum team that was forming, and we won't really get into all the events and how Scrum works, but these are a few things that are going to happen. Someone's late for your daily huddle or Scrum. Someone's not going to show. Someone from outside the team might show. And there are going to be people who'll be rambling off topic, and people who are going to get sick, and there are going to be people who leave mid-sprint, and there are people who come back after an extended leave, and there are other things as well. So what do we do as a team? And again, I've intentionally left this open with question marks, because again, how one team answers these set of questions will most definitely be different from another team. There could be a few things that are similar. There could be one, hey, if you show up late at the end of our huddle, we're going to have you sing a song. Or hey, there's the penny jar, and if you don't have a penny, you got to add a nickel. And if you don't have a nickel, you got to add a quarter, but you got to put a coin in, at the end of which we're going to all count it up and hopefully get a pizza or something. Or hey, if you're late, you got to do 10 push-ups. This is not what the coach is imposing. This is just the asking of questions for the team. So getting into self-organizing again, which has not been defined explicitly, we do want to have two things in mind. And all Scrum Masters should have this in their toolkit. You want to have team norms that we've just looked at as an example, and team agreements as well. The third thing that is not listed here, which could have its own thing, is you should consider a conflict resolution model. This is for a lot of advanced teams or people heading into hyperproductivity, or some people who's truly adept and comfortable in navigating conflict. So here's a bit of a segue. You recognize this guy? I got this off Wikipedia. Stan Laurel, born Arthur Stanley Jefferson. I did not even know that, An English comic actor, writer, and film director. You can always Google this fellow and see where he started, his personal life. You've probably seen him in animated antics on screen, right? What about this guy? Oliver Norvell Hardy. Did you know that was his full name? This American actor, of course, was also on the screens, and we at some time have been in splits looking at this fella. And hey, he came from humble backgrounds, ticket taker, was even a janitor at some point. Now, when you put it together, who are these two people? Laurel and Hardy. We've heard of them. We've seen their antics together. And this is getting a little bit into the concept of the third entity. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, how does this matter? What has this got to do with agility? And what's interesting is we are often engaged in a one-on-one situation or one-to-many, as I say, with individuals or groups, or something known as the third entity, which is really a living, breathing, emerging, creative, curious entity, which carries a belief system, a range of emotions, and is ever evolving. This is something so subtle, but again, we do engage in this without realizing. So here's another example or a set of examples. Sometimes we're just a bystander and we're looking at something or navigating two members of a team that are interacting. Are these the two guys that are always arguing about something? Are they always at loggerhead? Is there a total disconnect? What is it that you can anticipate when you go out and just have lunch with these two people? Two parents or guardians. It could be from a child's perspective and, hey, how do mommy and daddy interact? Or these are my parents or grandparents or the elders or children. I've got two daughters. John's got kids as well. And what do we notice as the relationship when the two kids come together? What is the energy there? What is the dynamic? Is there conflict? Is there love? Is there a combination of that? Is there people pulling their hair? Are they, loving each other, hugging each other, encouraging each other, And a child with parent A in quotes, because a child's interaction with one parent and the dynamic that comes about could be very different with the dynamic of another parent. And more, So this is the emergence of what we call the third entity. And when you get into some more formal coach training, we will get very deep into what this means and the impact. So coaches are not necessarily working one-on-one with people or with a pair or a group. They're actually truly working with what's known as a system and a third entity. And when you are coaching, you take on what's known as the coaching stance. We presented on this before as well. If you're not too familiar, this came about in 2011 with Lisa Atkins and Michael Spade, legends in the space of agility. I was fortunate enough to actually take a course with them as well. And coaching was rather loosely defined many years ago. And we said, what does it really mean to be a coach, and what is the stance that you take? And you can always read more upon this, but there's certainly the X-wing model where there's teaching, coaching, and that's professional coaching. We'll get into that. Mentoring and facilitation. And it's called like the X-wing model because it's like the grid that you're seeing on the screen. And teaching is like 101, instruction, the fundamentals. What is Scrum about? Do we need a daily huddle? How long should it be? It's a time box. What's the definition of the time box, right? Whereas the facilitation stand is one who's helping people navigate that. They may not be decision makers. They may not even participate, but they're kind of helping people connect all the dots together. Mentorings are stories and narratives and sharing what you know and what you've seen. They may or may not serve the immediate need or your team, but there's certainly something that might go, I didn't think about that, or an aha moment. And professional coaching is what we're really talking about, is how do we stay present with our client and serve them in what they do and their needs. So here's an example. to put this in perspective, some dev team members are not meeting consistently for your daily scrum. As they say, put in a cadence, same place, same time, everybody knows where it is, whether it's conference room A or is it virtual. We want to make sure everybody agrees and there are no distractions. You should be there every day. That's why it's called a daily scrum for a reason, right? We usually use antiperspirant on a daily basis. We usually take a bath on a daily basis. It serves a purpose. So there is a purpose for the daily scrum. But how might you tackle this? So if I were teaching, I might just talk about the purpose of it and the intent. If I were facilitating, I might just offer myself and say, hey, can I just get you all in a room and help explain the 3 questions? If I'm mentoring, I might just have that story that I was just talking about. Hey, I worked with another team and the same situation was happening, and here's what I kind of discovered. And here's the coach thing. Hey, what does this team want to do when this happens? It's an open-ended question. You're not imposing your thoughts, your beliefs. You're not making an executive decision. And you're really working with the system to see what do they want to do when this dysfunction arrives. Now, this model does do well with powerful questions. So this is something else that you could leverage. You could leverage this right away if you're in a Scrum Master type situation or getting into Agile coaching. And it's just a repository of questions. These are just a select few. Now, I do want to make one other distinction here. When I say, hey, what's been tried versus what have you tried? I am not focusing the question on the individual. I am focusing the question on a system. What has been working? Again, I'm not saying what has been working for you. What next? Short, simple questions. Now, if I did want to focus on an individual, I'm just going to say, what's stopping you? Now, clearly that is a one-on-one focus. And sometimes you have to take that on. But you need to be able to distinguish between the first entity, the second, and the third. And when I say, hey, what's stopping us? This is us as a group or a team or the third entity. Now, in red, intentionally, we are not asking the why questions because this leads to a challenge. This could get people defensive. If you're doing an exercise like the 5 whys, that serves a purpose. But in the coaching stance, we do not use the why question, right? The yes, no is also something you want to avoid because again, you don't want to kind of get people into a bias state or definitive unless you're seeking clarity or trying to bottom line an issue. Like, hey, John, I think I'm hearing you say X, Y, and Z. Is that right? And he said, oh, yeah, or no, I didn't mean that, or this is what I'm saying. So the clarifying question is fine. And again, there are a multitude of these questions that come across. Open-ended, short and simple. The X-Wing model that we looked at a few slides ago has grown over time. And I would encourage you all to look at this through the Scrum Alliance and understand, besides the domain knowledge that we have, we can dance in this circular image. They say, hey, servant leader, Scrum Master, serve the team, serve the organization, serve the product owner. So what does it mean to be serving, and who are you serving? Coaching is again about the mindset and the skills, some of which we are bringing out in this presentation, facilitating, guiding, advising, leading, transforming. And people are really working very hard to give this more shape in the industry. So with that, how do we reveal things and what are the dynamics that are coming about? What are the tools? Do we have any examples? Or the third entity that we spoke about very lightly. Here's one, Strengths Finder. Some of you have heard of this from me before. We have demonstrated it at one of our presentations as well. It's a very quick profile assessment based on your strengths. So it's not threatening. HR likes this kind of stuff. It's got 4 decades worth of research with the late Dr. Clifton, and it's being continued by Tom Roth. And really what it is asking you a series of questions. Takes about 30 minutes to do. And it's got these domains: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And once you answer these set of questions, it could be very simple. Like, hey, would you rather go out for a movie or would you rather read a book? There's no right or wrong answer to that, but it's just getting a sense of what is it that you prefer. With this, you will get a sense of your strengths within these domains. So here's a team that I work with. Now, team members 1 through 6. Team member 1, his first strength was that in the execution domain as an achiever, then was a strategic thinker. Context and input. Sorry, that's number 5. But then also relationship building, individualization, and empathy. Some of these are self-explanatory. So empathy is being relatable or having the ability to relate to others, either emotionally or situationally, and putting yourself in other people's shoes. That's a strength if we choose to recognize it as such, right? Now, team member 2, in contrast, their strength and forte was more in influencing. If you take a look, command is number 1. They were an activator. They were very good communicators. And then you get into strategic thinking. What I didn't see much of was the relationship building and the execution for this person, which is fine. This is just their strength. It doesn't mean that they are not executing. Hey, you're actually at a job, you're working with a team, you're doing work, but your strength lies somewhere else. Likewise, without getting into too much detail, we mapped out team member 3, team member 4, and team member 6. Team member 5 was a little shy. We were waiting on their results. I think we may have gotten 1. So here's a question, and you can put an answer on the chats. Again, some of you have seen this before, but what if team member 2 won the lottery or stepped away for about 2 weeks? How do you think the team would fare, or how would they do without this person? So team member 2, go back. If you notice, they are strong under the influencing. But besides team member 2, if you were to look at other team members, team member 1 through 6, there really wasn't an influencer here. This person was a traditional business analyst who was getting into product ownership. And he was the negotiator, the person with the charm, the skill, and could slice and dice requirements, could go back and say, hey, could we do this at a later time? And the other people were not as strong or adept at this. They certainly could, but they realized very quickly, oh my God, if we lose this person, we might struggle a little bit in this one domain. And this was very insightful for the team. Again, this model does not emphasize or get into agile practices or agility. This is something that you could actually use with family, you could use with a church group, you could use with any team, because this really gets into the core of who you are and where you thrive. I just happened to bring it into the corporate world and it worked really well. And guess what? HR was actually familiar with it as well. They liked it. So again, we're not teaching, we're not facilitating or mentoring, we're simply revealing something using another model over there. So how would you pick an agile coach? You might come across a lot of people you're either interviewing or you're already engaged with someone. But the hope is now that you've got some familiarity with some of the tools, the skills that have been coming out, third entity, and people do have industry or domain knowledge about the products and practical experience. Hey, you've been coaching for a couple of years versus just a couple of months. Budget and finances, everybody's got a budget. And then there's something situational. Are you working towards an enterprise transformation? Are you doing an initial adoption? Have you already started? Who is good at coming in over there? So working with a team that's just starting off and wanting to do one initiative with one team co-located, it's very different than, hey, we need a complete transformation with 13 agile coaches working across the enterprise, across the program, right? But if there was a higher standard that I could hold someone to, I do want to have a coach that simply helps reveal things, is patient, and is that change agent that we talk about. Get the teams empowered, and how do you do that? Again, with your team agreements, your norms, you help them navigate the conflict, you ask those powerful questions in an open-ended context. Don't that do us part? Well, you might just have that initial adoption that we're talking about. Or once you've found you're at a place of success, just move away or have the coach look into another area. So is there a one size fit all? No, not really. And simple slide, one bullet point, one kid in that overly grown green thing, I'm sure he'll grow into it. But just know, you got to keep a few things in mind when you're looking for good agile coaches that will work well with your teams, the culture, and has these skills and tools. So to summarize, we as agile coaches, you do carry the range of tools. Every organization has different needs, as we've gone over, and there is no one size fit all. There are other agile coaches on this call as well, and we'll open it up. We'll get into questions, we'll get into situations. You're probably seeing a few things come about from the chat as well. So we're very curious, in a collaborative spirit, what have you seen? What have you felt as a pain point? What has worked for you? What is not? Is there another tool you're not as familiar with? That'll come about as well. I do want to talk a little bit and bring awareness to systems coaching and professional coaching. There is an institution by the name of CRR Global, and they work with or brought this ORSC model, Organization and Relationship Systems Coaching. This is intended to go beyond one-on-one. A lot of times you have one-on-one with people who might be reporting with you, or if there's a sensitive situation. But when you get to professional coaching, they really want to work with two or more people together because they are looking for that third entity. And again, they believe that this is an intelligent system and an interesting dynamic that comes about, right? And with the ORSC model, it's not just for corporate. They work with families as well. They work in other industries as well. So the focus here, again, for agile coaches is to hone some coaching skills in recognizing that third entity or the dynamics that are coming about. There's another organization out there, and they have a lot of courses right in New York City, not too far from us, the Coactive Institute, Training Institute, coactive.com. Henry Kimsey House and Karen Kimsey House, if you've not read some of their works or looked at it, I would encourage you to do so. And again, they talk a lot about finding alignment, designing an alliance, what it looks like. And we saw some of that in the narrative and the story that I had, but truly believing in the system that emerges and some of the things that we use as tools. And it's quite simple as listening. There are 3 levels of listening. When it's conversational, you're meeting up with an old friend or eating at the cafeteria, you're just going back and forth. But when you hold your tongue and you're really coming in from a curious standpoint, you get into level 2 listening. That's more one-on-one. And when you start hearing what the team is saying or trying to express and you call it out, that itself is another skill in level 3. And when a community is up in arms, which you'll see on the media, read about somewhere, that's a level 4. And what's happening, and can you identify that? So you're focusing not on just one person, you're focusing on this third entity. And this also helps when you've got the self-awareness. If you understand yourself a little bit better, then you can understand and relate to others as well. So that's the most of what I had, because we are going to open this up to questions and also hear from others. It's a very simple, quick presentation. If you'd like to give feedback, put in something in the chat. We usually get a fist pump and hold up, hey, 5 was great, fantastic, I really liked it, or 1, this wasn't for me, but 3 was kind of in the middle. And this is very interesting. Scrum Masters use this. People in church use this as well. And there are different ways of doing it. I might say, hey, you know what? If I was in a room, I'm going to turn around so I cannot see your response. I want everybody else to just say, what do you thought of this? So this is the team getting a sense of comfort. It's an interesting safety check and doing it that way. I could vary this and say, you know what? I'm sensing a little odd thing over here. I want everybody just to cover their eyes if they could trust me, and then give a quick fist, and then I will let you know when to put it down. And then you can open your eyes. This is now the facilitator or the coach or scrum master getting a feeling of what's happening in the room. And that's also an additional safety check. And you might get some body odor if there's someone next to you who didn't use deodorant raising their hand. But hey, all banter and fun aside, this is another technique you can use in your tool bed. So with that, I do want to give us an opportunity to open it up for questions. We can elaborate on any section, any slides. You can talk about something situational. And it's okay for others to chime in here as well. This is giving permission. This is another skill, and allowing others to do that. So let me see if I can also bring up a chat as well.
Yeah, Nitin, if you're looking for a question, and again, everybody has the ability to unmute themselves. So if you want to ask your questions directly, you can. And I'll seed it off with one of the questions that was asked in the chat. This is by Thomas Johnson. Thomas, I don't know if you want to ask the question yourself, but let me ask it for you here. He typed, this is when you were talking about the power questions. He asked, how do you respond when team members do not provide any feedback to your open-ended questions? Then what happens?
This is interesting. I'm going to look for some context. So this is the entire team and nobody says a thing?
Yeah.
Oh, Thomas is on right now, by the way.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there are some situations where, I'll be talking to a team of people and nobody will want to give any feedback on anything. no matter what you ask or why you're asking, or, they'll just sit there and nobody will say anything.
You're going to get a lot of blank stares, perhaps.
Mhm.
So this is where you have to work on safety, a safety check. And I have actually been in this situation because people were just taken aback, or they were just disengaged or multitasking or doing other things. One thing that worked for me, and this may or may not work for you right away, is give an example. When you say, hey, how do you want to work with me? It's an open-ended question. Nobody was saying anything. And I said, well, if I could give you an example, how does this look like? Working with fun, with patience, being stern. And I'm throwing out a few options out there to kind of get them thinking about this. Oh, is this what this is about? And so on. And see if it could change the situation a little bit, and then get into another question. I would always have something with me in my back pocket. I might reveal what another team has revealed. And that also gets some light bulbs going, right? So there are two things. One is certainly, hey, I don't really understand the ask. Could you give me an example? I'm not sure how to ask that question. So that's the safety thing. Who's this new guy and how do we work towards that? There might have to be some other team bonding exercises or other things to happen, or work through those examples. So that's what I've used. Anybody else wants to chime in? See if they've got those blank stares and what they've tried?
Yeah, I've tried using a meta conversation. So for example, instead of saying, say Thomas Johnson is really quiet, I'll ask Nitin to go, Nitin, what do you think Thomas would say about this? And it's sort of the meta conversation, and it actually draws them out because they don't feel like it's not personal. Now you're talking about someone else and you're trying to help them out. So
yeah, that's great.
So.
It's like the daddy-daughter game. It's like, all right, my 10-year-old daughter, let's switch roles. When you look at daddy or think of daddy for the day, how does he talk to you? How does he interact? And so on. It gets very colorful and enlightening. And okay, and if you were daddy, what would that be like?
I see that Larry Salo, I see you unmuted yourself. Did you want to make a question, make a comment, or did you have a question for Nitin?
No, I was just going to add, sometimes there's some benefit to just naming the behavior of silence and asking the group what that's about. So it's kind of turning that, it's not, and with the right tone of voice, that it's not judgmental, it's just curious, and wait some more and see if the group, because now you're not asking them about content, you're asking them about process.
Right. This is getting a little into the intuition and naming the emotional field. So as a coach, I might say, I'm sensing some intimidation here, right? Or I'm sensing some fear. Is that what it is? No. And see if that shifts anything. So silence is a given, right? But what's causing it? That's just peeling back the layer of the onion. That's what it is. Or I'm sensing distraction here. What's going on?
Okay, thanks.
There was a situation where we had our leader was really well respected in a group. Say, hey, we all need to just connect this afternoon. Please clear your calendars. And people are like, oh, I wonder what this is about. So they do that. They go in, and he said, howdy, folks. I'm glad you could all come in on this call. Just to let you know, I have accepted a job offer with another company, and I'm resigning in 2 weeks. And there was just silence, right? Now, that silence there could be very different than a coach coming in and saying, how do you want to work with me, right? So the emotional field is different, right? So that was more of a shocker. but somebody had to call it out. And I actually did that. I said, and there's, so he was like, am I audible? No one talking? And I said, hey, you know, this is sudden news. We're all taken aback. I think several of us are just taking the time to process this before we speak any further, you know, and that's all it is. That's just a recognition of what's happening at that stage and then stating it out more explicitly, you know, that itself takes skill. And that is in service to the team as well.
You know, this, and one other thought is maybe go back to the silent writing, depending on the topic. So if it may be that it doesn't feel safe for them to volunteer an answer verbally, so shifting to a different way of collecting the input might also just be another tool in the toolbox to try.
Yes, agreed. Agreed. Okay.
Does anyone else have a question? I see a comment here from Michael Alla, who says that we have been having a lot of discussion about emotional safety and creating a culture where people are encouraged to speak up, make mistakes, etc. I'm assuming that, Michael, that you're sharing about your particular environment. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. But
Sure. So, you know, and I guess as you're talking about that, if you're in a room where you've got a team that you're working with and you're asking a question and you're consistently getting silence, you probably need to look at the culture within your team, within your organization, and why people don't feel empowered to kind of voice their opinions, their thoughts.
Agreed completely. Well summarized. Some of this could be situational. So, you know, you could have a team that's very energetic, engaged, and they're just having free-flowing conversation. But as soon as someone in a position of management, of leadership walks into the room, everybody quiets down, you know. The mood shifts, and you can kind of sense that as well as see that, right? And that is now another person coming in to this entity, right? The other thing is, hopefully this is, if you reverse it, yeah, everybody's, you know, a little low in morale, and somebody comes in and the mood shifts again. It's a little bit more jovial. Okay, he's here now. Either we'll get more information, or we see what's happening, or we can open up, so on and so forth. But safety checks are certainly very important, and there are ways of doing that as well. We must always get a sense of, you know, where we truly are, and just be honest and transparent about that as well.
So, sorry.
I'm sorry, Laurie. You go. Go ahead.
Okay. I want to, coming all the way back full circle, I mean, this has been really enlightening and a very rich and concise explanation of a bunch of different, I'll call them classical coaching models. But could you close the loop? What makes an agile coach different than a professional coach? Is it simply subject matter expertise in agile, or is there some other connection here that you might have said and I just missed it? What's the secret sauce of agile coaching as opposed to this other coaching?
The agile coaching, as you said, Larry, and I agree, the subject matter expertise lies in the realm of formal agile practices, whereas a professional life coach, if I could contrast, could actually be an executive coach that has no familiarity with agility, one, or let's say professional coach who's helping people in a personal situation, a personal matter, a family matter, and so on. They still have the same skill sets to use, but the domain knowledge is different. So EY, as a company, as an example, has executive coaches. And they are people who engage with senior leadership. They are not adept at agility. They may not even be familiar with some of the Scrum practices, but they are offering these services to leadership in understanding what's happening and what's next, or helping them get to the what's next.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to
I'm sorry, Laurie. I'm sorry to cut you off, John, but John Riling has been patiently raising his hand, so I'll give him the next question or comment. John, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Thank you, John. Yeah, this is really a fascinating presentation, and what's hitting me though, and it's kind of almost going against the grain for me, is I'm wondering, how do you measure your effectiveness, especially when the objective, and I've always understood the objective was what you stated, to kind of work yourself out of a job. You know, if you're no longer needed, you've done your job well. How does all that work? How do you measure progress? How do you measure effectiveness?
That's a great question, you know, and you can come up with all kinds of internet memes on this, or cartoon strips, and see the homeless bum on the road said, you know, eventually I worked myself out of a job and ended up on the streets, right? So how do you measure value or success? You asked that question, you know. So when I was an agile coach, I asked leadership, hey, you know, in 3 months, if you were to write me a thank you card, what would that look like? You know, and they rattle off a few things. And if I wanted to condense it further, I said, well, what if you wanted to write me a thank you email in 30 days? What would that look like? You know, and you understand what's their pain point, what are they hoping, what are the expectations? And you start designing an alliance that way and say, you know, if there's something immediate or pressing, can we put it aside for a moment and say, how do we want to work together? You know, because projects will come and go, you know, initiatives will come and go, finances will be fluctuating, but usually the people stay. You know, the personalities are there. People evolve, of course, but if I am to take on an engagement for a little bit of time, what would that look like? You know, this is more at a coach level and understanding the value system. And at the end of 30 days, you can just revisit that. You know, hey, you know, this is what you told me 4 weeks ago. How are we doing? You know, has anything changed? Has anything progressed? Has anything regressed? You know, do we need to revisit some agreements? And guess what? Scrum teams do this at retrospectives every 2 weeks or so. Hey, we said we do X amount of work. This is where we landed. But besides the work, you know, what else happened? Were there any distractions along the way? Did we learn something? Is something happening over and over again that's an annoyance? Mm-hmm. You revisit those situations as well.
Can I follow that up a little bit? I
Sure.
hear what you're saying, and these all sound like good things, but who hired you? Like, what if the team, like the team was kind of given you? They didn't necessarily say, we need a coach, let's go out and find one and hire one. So if you're asking them, well, what are your expectations? Maybe they think, well, maybe you ought to ask some manager somewhere what his or her expectations were, because they're the ones that hired you.
That is very interesting. And that's exactly what happened in an earlier engagement. I was working with 2 teams. One team who had been doing Scrum for about 1.5 years said, we need an agile coach. Can you please budget or fund or get someone? Okay. All right. So the manager is saying, okay, we'll get an agile coach for this team. How about we just use them for this other team who's not even asking, right? So there's a very different contrast right there. And then I'm talking to the managers and, well, what are your expectations? You know, well, I need this. I'm looking for more transparency, and I want people to be talking to each other, and I want to see what's going on in their world, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's your relationship and one alliance and a potential third entity there. Your other group who's been doing this for a year and a half, say, we don't need you to do this or that. We already know what Scrum is, right? We need you to tell us what's wrong, why isn't this working, and hold us to a higher standard. And if you're doing what we're doing and doing everything management is asking, go back and tell them to back off, right? So again, you need to understand the current scenario, reveal itself, the system, in a non-threatening way, not only just to the team, but to leadership as well, right? Close any potential gaps and take it from there. There are ways of measuring performance and how the team is evolving. You got all kinds of spider maps and journeys, be it engineering practices, test-driven development, continuous integration, value delivery. You can even measure morale as things go along. I even had a Dear Scrum Master lane for people so they could put in sticky notes on me when I was Scrum Mastering for a bit. Hey, we need help with this. Here, we need with that. And I would try to knock those out, and they would only move the cards forward to a done themselves. I couldn't touch it. So I could not move or self-evaluate. They would be responsible for that.
Now, it looks like Seth had a comment to add on this. Seth?
Yeah, it was, and Nitin was sort of touching on this. Sometimes you could do assessments, agile assessments in particular, and you can see where you are. You can build that backlog, and then you can measure the teams at the very beginning, and then towards maybe 3 months out, and see how you compare against that. And Nitin sort of touched upon that with his 90 and 30-day letter. That's just another formal way of doing it.
Okay. Now, Larry, I cut you off before to hand the time over to John. Did you have something to ask or comment on before, Larry?
No, I think I get my itches got scratched. My questions were answered. Thank you.
Okay. We have about 2 minutes left before we have to go into start wrapping up. But we do have 2 minutes for a question. Anybody questions or comments for Nitin on this topic?
And I'll also stay on informally for another 15 minutes where we stop recording. So that gets colorful and entertaining as well.
Yeah. Again, I don't see any questions in the chat or any particular comments on the topic. Last call. Otherwise, then I'll let Nitin wrap up with the final words, and I have some announcements to make. Anybody? Questions? Okay. In that case, Nitin, why don't you wrap it up, and then we'll go into the commercials. You have any the last words?
No, I think it was a great audience. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you for others who also participated. That's all I had.
Thank you all very much. Please remember, you will be getting a feedback email coming up soon. Please fill out the feedback form. When you do that, if you also decide you want us to report your PDUs for us, please go to that additional form. Just type in your name, first name, last name, and your PMI ID number, and we will automatically report your PDUs for you, so you don't have to do anything else after. And so with that, I want to say for myself and for Nitin and Bob, and on behalf of PMINJ, I want to wish all of you a very happy holidays and a happy new year, and we hope to see you again very soon.